Actually, Tom,
I
yeah.
was going to ask Evelyn, given the work that you and Kenny have done, how aligned, and your example about the CEO kind of answered my question, is that how aligned is status with ranking?
Yeah, a lot. I think it's highly aligned, and I think I learned a lot from that specific example as well. So what I now try to do when I sense that this is something that could happen, having a talk with the person that will be very high in rank in such a session, like making that person aware of the impact and the influence that that person has on a specific
Hmm.
session. And for example, also what anchoring can do to a situation. So when you are high in rank, have that conversation like, hey, what do you want to get out of this session, and will it help for you to drop an anchor, or will it help when others drop an anchor first? So having those conversations related to status ranking, I think that's a very important aspect of preparing such a session as well. And I learned a lot
Okay.
from the clapping example. Yeah.
Okay.
So
No.
connecting to the ranking and to a question that was before to Don about even if it's a generalizable model, how do you bring it over to the context? And you said, I explained the general model and then I find a way, a metaphor that fits the context of the specific group. And
Yeah.
then I was asking time. So my question is the following. I experience a sort of cognitive load-based ranking in
Yes.
any group.
Yeah.
The mental power, you can translate it to IQ, you can translate it to emotional quotient. There is a ranking of brain power that is very definitely there. And in fact, if there's a group of people trying to find a solution together, what they are bringing is their thinking, if we're talking software. And we want them to be running on the fullest maximal brain thing that they can do. But that creates a sort of ranking. How even a metaphor that comes from biology or molecular modeling, it already assumes you understand that, right?
Well,
How
this is why I included cognitive dissonance in one of the definitions. As soon as our brains are wired, if they don't know something, threat, run like Forrest. Basically, get out of there. That is your whole reflex is geared towards that. Now, if you trip that, it's hormonal. There's nothing you can do about it. You're on for the ride. You're a passenger to those chemicals. So you really don't want to trip threat response, um, bad surprise, or cognitive dissonance. This is what I believe. That's what you're saying. That's coming out of your mouth. It doesn't agree with me. Forest, run. So that's why I say that, and I try to premise and use a little bit of humor to say, this is what I've said. It's not true. Don't assume that it is. Let's now go and get the evidence together and work it out. And I learn a ton of things from other people that then helps me to understand their perspective, where they're coming from, and then which metaphors to choose and model. Because you're right, Laura, it's finite. And also, you also need to know when to stop. When you can see somebody's in that state, that's the time to let them go, take a break, come back, reframe. And to Evelyn's point, that guy clapping just triggered everybody's threat response. Nothing productive was going to be done. And you're now repairing a bad situation. So and that's the other reason for assuming. I would rather people tell me to shut up, I already know that, stop talking, than to assume that they know, because at least one person in that room doesn't know. And if they're the one person, then they're probably reluctant to ask, unless they're the boss man who doesn't have anything to lose, or may even have something to lose because he will now look like he's not the alpha dog in the room. So, those are the things that I consider. And these are all human. Understanding how humans work helps then to make those right choices with that limited resource.
This reminds me
So,
a lot
of the collaborative sessions I'm in, when you're talking about the domain, right, from the domain-driven design perspective,
Right,
the
right,
PO
right.
is in there, and we presume that the PO knows. But most of the time, the business doesn't know either.
No.
But that can create that anxiety as well, right, in that collaborative. And you need to manage that, and they call it within deep democracy holding space, right? You want to hold that anxiety together. Now, I always have one basic rule which I learned from my wife is I never ever give someone the spotlight, except there may be a but if this person is a really high ranking, right? Then I will say, hey, if it circles around management and the manager is in the room, I will say, hey, do you have anything to add because this is about you?
Yep.
But I only do that if they're higher in rank. But what you're talking about, the person feeling I don't understand, which partly in your talk I had, right? Then I'm like, oh, don't ask me. Maybe don't.
Yeah, so I'm going to call
but
Kenny now to answer that question.
Yeah. And my wife says this a lot. She's in an organization, and it happens a lot to her. And she tries to explain it, and she says it's horrible. And she really is really smart, but she needs some process time, and then she gives you an answer that is on the spot and correct, right? So also when you stop a session and you say, okay, how did you think it went? Well, she doesn't know yet. She needs to process it. So I try to never give someone a spotlight. Also, if you're in a collaborative session and the business is like, well, we don't know, okay, don't give them the spotlight. Except if the group gives them a spotlight, but then I need to make it safe to answer it.
Yeah, so I think Kenny's metaphor is really good. Choose when you're going to spend somebody else's cognitive energy. And you have to make some kind of judgment from experience working with other people that this person is in a condition to respond and is not going to trigger their threat response and they're out the room. So it's practice, I think, and experience and getting to know people. Yes, there are theories, but I found that, like Kenny, facilitating a various bunch of people, I've done, I don't know, since 2014, something like 600, 700 different workshops with a whole bunch of people, university, senior, everyday project people. You get a feel for being able to read the room, literally. Yeah. So I would say, like Kenny said, be careful of what you focus on. Also consider the conditions in that space, and look out for negative signals like you have just tripped this person's threat response, so they're not going to be useful to you or anybody else, and give them space to recover.
It also reminds me of a post or a blog or article I read by Edgar Schein about anxiety of learning. You basically have two anxieties there. You have learning anxiety and survival anxiety. And in a collaborative modeling session, which is right in this workshop, it's like a pressure cooker. And you need to create a safe space for people to be able to learn, because else you're gonna increase the survival anxiety, which means if I cannot go along, I'll lose my job. And that's the easiest one to trigger, right? Because I can just say, well, if you don't learn this, you're out of a job. That's but you want to lower the learning anxiety. That's the best trigger to do. But you need a psychological safe thing that people can say, I don't understand. I need some more time. But there's never time, right? But
yeah, I agree. But I think this is where you were saying, you and Evelyn were talking about status and rank. Then the highest ranked person should say something that is so stupid or obvious, or how can you not know that it's a surprise, but it's not an unpleasant surprise, and then humanizes the situation. Because it's like, if this guy who is paid six figures doesn't know this, then hey, maybe I'm not so bad after all, because I know this and I know that, and it completely changes the dynamics in the room. That CEO clapping was saying, I dare you to say anything. Exactly. And if you say something, you're going to get sacked.
Yeah, and that what you're saying, in event storming, we have the pattern called being the dumbest person, right? As a facilitator, I'll just ask the dumb questions. Especially, it's even nicer if I make a mistake. People are often very on point to tell me I made a mistake, but I'm fine there as a facilitator because I'm neutral, so I'll just do it for people. We also call it ghost rolling, right?
You create that safe space because it's like, oh, lightning didn't strike.
Yeah.
The heads didn't come off. They didn't die and collapse. Okay, it's not so bad to make an error, so I can try some stuff that I don't know.
Yeah.
They're still uncomfortable, but it now begins to create that safety net that it's okay. If nothing, you said something about relative, what was that? Not the ranking, but when people, if you ask someone for an estimate and they say 3 months, and then somebody else says 3 weeks, they're gonna adjust that. Okay, yes. So then you drop your anchor in the deepest part of the pool, and then kind of everybody else goes there rather than the shallow end.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think, because I think I know where your question is coming from, and I've seen.
Yes, my question is, but I do have the responsibility to ask the questions that. My question was coming from trying to be equal, because that's where my heart pulls, and having everybody on board, versus getting the job done and engaging everything we possibly can to get to a solution as fast as we can.
I think that different people have different energy, different capabilities at different times. Mm-hmm. So the metaphor model I think about with teams is as long as you're in a clump and in a group, somebody is always going to be at the back and somebody's always going to be at the front, and everybody else has to be in between. As long as that's the case, then we move at that speed. There's no point one person making it to the end if the sport is that everybody has to get over the finish line, because then it's less likely that your team, there's been a lot of sports science on this, it's less likely that your team is going to make it if you split up. You have to stay together.
But how, as a facilitator, how do you...
I think I know the answer to my question, and that where I can find an answer is in the 4 rough different decision models that Kenny was listing, where, okay, if I know that there is a huge inequality on how informed or how complex of an overview some people have, whereas other people are not informed and don't want to put the time on knowing all the details, then I switch decision models, and that probably answers my question.
Yeah. And if I can answer one more thing, I use a lot of the concept called climate report and ghost roles, meaning a ghost role is in role theory, it's something that's there but it's not coming to the conscious level. So I, as a facilitator, be the dumbest person in the room or ask the dumbest question. That's a role, right? It's like, it's there in the room. You sense that it's there. So me as a facilitator will just let it pop up, right? So that's the first one. And the second one, if before I come with a proposal, I try to let the group take ownership and let them experience by just giving facts. For instance, I see that a part of the group is silent and the rest of the group is talking. And then I shut up. And if the group is like, okay, and now I can come with a proposal, right? Because now they're accepting the problem, and then I can come with that decision with a more proposal-oriented one to make quicker decisions. But yeah, to make quicker decisions, you want to give lesser space. That's basically.
And what when you're not the facilitator, but you're part of, but it's like your team members.
Yeah.
Because basically what I'm hearing is you need a facilitator. That's
even for meeting, I would say you do, because if you have an agenda, you have an objective, you're allowing random chance to get you there unless somebody is guiding. Again, who is in the front and who is at the back, and everybody else in between. So
does that mean that's most meetings? Well, okay. Well, I'm making I can't possibly imagine that this would work in organizations, but that actually whenever there's really important decisions being made, there should be a facilitator, and somebody needs to like step out and take on that role.
You can still mediate the decision, even if you're a part of it. It's hard, but you can do it.
By default, that is usually the person who called the meeting, which is the most senior person.
Needs to be the facilitator rather than...
They don't necessarily need to be the facilitator, but by default, especially for strategic decision making, usually very senior people, ranking overrides everything.
Yeah. So there's also this interesting concept from two anthropologists from the Netherlands. They call this role the shaman role, right? And they say, so for instance, I'm in a group, I'm teaching people to do collaborative modeling, but then they're now facilitating themselves, but now they're coming to me saying, well, I'm doing this with my team, but I also want to talk about content. Can you come and facilitate this for me? So I'll just act like the neutral person that doesn't give I don't really give anything about the outcome, so that he can be the person with content. So also go to other groups in your company that can facilitate it, right? It's just, it doesn't have to be someone in the group. It can also be another Scrum Master or another Agile coach or another consultant that's working in another team, and ask them and invite them, we're going to take an important strategic decision. I don't want to bias my team or the team I'm in. Please help. So that can also be an option. It doesn't have to be a consultant outside of the company, but it really depends on how high the friction is. And so it doesn't have to...
It's more the when do you know that you're going to... Do you always know that you're going to make important decisions? Like, because it just, decisions just happen along the way. And
you're right. Decisions happen along the way, and you should have a nominated, like you said, it could be a member of the team who facilitates and make sure that what has been decided, who has decided, what needs to be escalated, what then needs to be allocated to whoever. That's not going to happen by chance unless somebody is coordinating that. And then as you go up and it's more senior, it has a lot more impact and a lot more effect or defect, depending. So I know that we're still learning as organizations how to use that tool effectively, but meetings can be effective. They're not all just to torture people around the table for half an hour or something and then you leave. But what I've seen practiced is you have a facilitator. It doesn't matter who it is necessarily, but you have somebody in that role. Then that time and space for all of those people who are there is a lot more productive and effective.
I think it's this balance between living in hive minds, where like that balance between just living in hive mind and you're just part of a couple of hive minds on a daily basis, versus the people being brought into the room to make decisions together, and like being more deliberate about decisions and how. So we as an organization, our company, we started like we've tried to be non-hierarchical, and like that was the whole thing. We've learned that does not work. There's always hierarchy, and as Mark talks about it, it's more like you need a more like a dynamic hierarchy, and I think we talked about some of this already with Kenny. But it's how do you know when to become more deliberate, and how do you make that decision? And I think in larger organizations that are starting from a more hierarchical perspective, this might actually come easier, because your default is we need to make decisions and we need to have a paper trail, and and that's well, it's fascinating, interesting, difficult stuff.
So I think as long as you have a structure, it doesn't mean that it can't change. And this is the thing that I find fascinating, back to the thing that you said about models being useful but not necessarily accurate. But as long as you have a structure and a way of doing things, then you can always iterate and improve. Otherwise, it's again down to randomness, who's in the room at the time, and that will dictate what is done, as opposed to group behavior. But the thing you said about the hive mind is interesting, because I mean, I work for a massive organization, and I've experienced, just yesterday, I was having a conversation with someone who I've never met, and she might as well have been scraping the inside of my brain. Everything that she said was, has she been reading my notes and looking at things? And then the people I've worked with for years, and we still have to do the do you mean and do you say and what does that mean, and translate it for the 50th time. So, you know, the whole human dynamic, I think, is the thing that's really interesting. Even though we're talking about APIs, what is the human API?
Yeah, and I want to, well, Laura, what you said, right? You can take in positions facilitating and talk about content, but it requires experience of what's your position in the group. And if you know a team for long, you can actually do it. I've worked a lot with Evelyn and a few other people. When we take decisions as a group, you see us going like up and down, up and down, up and down, right? And then I started talking for a lot, and then someone else said, Kenny, you know, wait, time out. And oh yeah, okay, I'm doing it again, right? So we know each other's triggers, and we help each other facilitate that to come to a perfect decision. So it is possible. It just takes experience.
With this, so from Xin Yao, we had the question, could Don or Greg connect, but also Kenny, who's on stage, connect the dots between ranking, cognitive bias conflicts, and idealized design or ideal present? I guess you're kind of answering to that in a way, as in how to get to an ideal design at the moment versus keeping the ranks in float.
You're always going to have conflict. As long as you have people, somebody is not going to agree. The extent, to Kenny's point about disruption, to the extent that someone doesn't agree, it could be, I don't agree, but I'll sign up, or hell no, I'm not doing this. So you won't get 100% consensus, but at least, again, the metaphor that I keep using, as long as that person who is hell no, but still at the back of the group, and we haven't lost them, is there, then there's an opportunity, for them to bring whatever they bring to the fore and help, or a chance to look at what's happening and be convinced by experience as opposed to theory. Because a lot of times when I talk to people, people say, oh, that's all very theoretical and blah, blah, blah. How does it get done? Which is why even in the example, I knew it was a lot of information, but I tried to tie it to practically, okay, this is what we did with it. So you can kick the tires on it and try. So I think if you're trying to go for something that is ideal and you don't have conflict, it's not ideal. It's always a level of, compromise and agreement and all of that, but take the first step and keep everybody together. So if you remember that metaphor that I had of the cube, all of that is packed inside that space moving, and how you flatten it out will help you then to jump from each of those different tiles. Say, okay, now let's talk about ideal present. All right, we're done with that. You're sick and tired of that. Okay, now let's do a prototype and see how that's going to work. Okay, now let's come back and talk about the next step and you're literally playing hopscotch across that three-dimensional flattened shape.
Yeah. And to add to that decision making, what I think it's important is, don't be like the Dutch. Polderen, we call it. Polderen means making concessions on decisions, right? It's meaning or. So we're going to do this or this, right? But you want to go to a moment to do both and. Meaning, so a personal one is my wife. When we go to a party, she might be cognitive loaded too soon, right? So she says, well, I know I will be there. I know at some point I just want to go home. which is fine, but don't make concessions that I then go with her, because then she will extend the period that she will be there, and I will lower the time that I be there and come in the middle. And now we are both in a situation that we don't want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
So then we take a decision. What are we going to do? Are we going to go early? And what do I need to go to do that? Or are we going late? And what does she need to go in order to do that? So when we go to the end, she says, well, then I go home at that point. Okay, fine. Now we have both ends. But never take concessions on that thing. And that means, and I give you a very concrete example, we needed to make the decision between React and Vue for a front-end technology, right? And we took with 9 people, we took a vote, and 8 out of 9 voted for React, while the person driving it wanted to go to Vue. Okay, fine, well, we're gonna do React. So I'm asking the question, what do you need to do in order to go along with React? And that person said, okay, that means I need spend some more time to learn React and what's the difference with Vue. So I go back to the group and it says, okay, we're gonna do React, and this person needs to understand more what the differences are. Are you okay with that? And the whole group decided yes. And now we can go along. And that person didn't have anything to go against React now. And now we are in the both end situation. I'm adding something to that ideal, to that now, into the decision. So it's not decision and what does it require for you to take along, okay, but also that requirement needs to go in the group. It needs to be a full concession again. And if not, we're going to go into the conflict. So we're going to talk more about it. Why don't you want to do this? And that takes a lot more time. Mm-hmm. So I hope that answers that question.
May I?
Sure, no, go for it. Go for it.
We're nearing the end of time, but I like asking these questions from people. What has changed in the way you look at, wicked problems, let's call it that way, in the last, I don't know, name it, 3, 4, 5, 6 years? I get this, it depends how often you get epiphanies, but the way that you look at wicked problems now that you couldn't even imagine looking at them that way X time ago. I'm not going to put either of you on the spotlight.
We're already on the spotlight.
So do you want to go first, Kenny?
So what can you repeat it one? So
the way you look at problems that are extremely hard to resolve, either human or technical, the way you look at them, how is there something that's so fundamentally different in the way you look at them today than you used to before? Yeah,
and that has all to do with my own trigger. So I'm gonna be a bit vulnerable here. I did a lot of coaching, and I figured out that from a childhood I didn't feel welcomed, right? So I knew, and that really affected me in the way I did it. So like 5 years ago, I started diving in this. Why is that as a human? Why don't I feel welcome? Goes a bit back into transactional analysis. And I cannot pronounce that last word in English. Sorry for that. And it goes into what triggers me, right? And there's this loop that you go through. So let me give you an example. And it's called racketing pattern. And a racketing comes from the mob in Italy, right? Meaning, I'm here to protect you, and you need to give me money. And then you say, from who? Yeah, from me, right? And you do this to yourself as well. So, for instance, if I don't feel welcomed, and this is as a facilitator really hard to manage. If I don't feel welcome, I started talking because I want to avoid the conflict. So I start talking more, faster, and louder to do that, right? And in the hope to getting my welcoming. Now, 2 things can happen here. The person can say, oh, that's really interesting what you can say here. And then the first thing I'll do is, no, you're not. So I start disbelieving that person welcomes me, or they cannot welcome me. And then I can tell to myself, you see, they're not welcoming me, going back into my pattern again. So I learned this a lot. And what I learned from there is when I used to go into a discussion technically, right? What's the better decision? I was more driven by that trigger, by that human emotion of you need to hear me and you need to welcome me on my decision, on my solution. While that solution might not be the correct solution. So while learning this from myself, what I do differently now is try not to give too much of a, well, I try to stay neutral and say, well, there's so many things around me that I don't have influences on. If someone doesn't feel well, if I feel I disagree with this person, I first start looking into myself. Is this because I don't feel welcome, or do I truly disagree with that person? So I first take that step back before I start talking and start reevaluating. Okay, why don't I disagree with this person? Is this my human racket emotion again that wants to be welcomed? And that gave me a lot of reason to just let a lot of these stuff go and really focus on what really makes an effort. And through that focus, I started being a lot more effective, because now I talk mostly about the stuff that really makes a difference there, and not talk anymore about the stuff that doesn't really matter. Like people doing trunk-based development, it matters to me, but I'm not doing any development at the moment. So yeah, why should I care, right? I just, and use of the time, I just go head in first, because I generally disagree with people not doing trunk-based development. People know this, they laugh at me now for that, right? Okay, you're getting triggered again. But actually, well, you know, I'm not doing it, so why should I care at this moment? So I can let it go more easily. And that really changed. And that started with checking with myself, why do I try to make these decisions a lot? Well, I shouldn't care because I'm not working it.
Thank
Long
you.
story, but I hope that helped.
Yeah, I think that's also really honest, because I have this standard observation that I make. Anyone, even Spock, who says that they are logical and have no feelings, then is not human. And by denying those things, or think you can control them, I think a segue from Kenny, I think I finally just embraced all of my variability and quirks and oddness and everything else. And the things that I see that other people don't see. A lot of times people squint at me and say, what the hell are you talking about? That is also fine. I just have to figure out ways to share it and get people to help me to explain it and talk about it and be vulnerable. Like this talk is the first time I've given this, and I agonized over this, and I don't know how many times I've changed the slides, but as Kenny said, I said I was going to do it. I'm going to do it. I will learn something. Nothing is perfect. The other thing that I think has changed in terms of wicked problems is understanding that it's like peeling an onion. And there are more things that we don't know than we do. So I should be looking out for the things that I don't know and not worrying about the things that I do or everybody else knows. So asking a lot of questions, some extent. I have a saying to people, even when I ask them, I said, is this thing going to kill me, or will it just give me a broken toe? If I am just going to get injured, I can recover. And I'm not talking about this just literally, but also metaphorically. But if I'm dead, I'm gone and buried. So take a risk. So I think I take a lot more risks, and I've accepted that it's okay not to know things, but ask a ton load of questions and share things that you're thinking about and get feedback. Even if the feedback is, I have no idea what you're talking about, because that is valid. Okay. First things, I got to figure out how to express that. And is this even a good idea? The opposite of Kenny's trunk-based development. He has an opinion. I haven't formed one. Yeah. And whether you call that being curious, taking some courage, taking some risks, I think that's definitely changed the way that I approach things. I used to be a lot more sure about things. Yeah, I know, and it's absolutely this, and it will never change. I think the world has kicked my ass enough that I know that that's not true. So it's definitely coming from a human perspective, knowing more about myself and making decisions about things that I need to do and not necessarily running from the discomfort.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that last one was the best one. Be
Which one?
comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. Okay.
Easier said than done.
That's my golden thing, right? Just be that person that's sitting in the fire, right? Sitting in the fire is the book as well. But
I have a better one. Have you ever tried to hug a cactus? You just have to do it really carefully, right? Pat up and then do it really slowly and carefully.
I haven't tried it deliberately.
Okay.
I did once.
It's a little complicated. Complex but complicated.
I think we're all paneled out.
Thank you very, very much for engaging on this deep level, and for your personal examples, and for willing to open up on how you really see certain questions.